So now that we've got pretty much all the core systems done, we need to start branching out and moving on. So the next thing we're going to be designing is entities. So we're going to just have a base class so we can do things generically with entities, um, ranging from like NPC versus player combat, player versus player, NPC versus NPC, um, capturing NPCs or something silly, or just so we can do everything in very generic terms if we need to, because we don't know what we need to do. We're just implementing the basics, and so server owners and everyone's free to do what they want, and we should just make it flexible. So if we just use generic entity and have all entities subclass set, then they're free to do whatever. So we're gonna have, I think, 4 types of entities. We're gonna have items on the ground. That's those can be those can come from players just dropping things, killing NPCs and they drop on the ground. Just spawns. So they're kind of going to be like, I wouldn't say like value objects, but they're going to be similar to it. We're also going to have objects. These are going to be things like furnaces, anvils, beds, doors, ladders, just things like that. So we're going to have to come up with a system to deal with that. Oops. Let's try and find a unique symbol to know that we have to come back. Sure. That's really bad. I don't know what I was doing there. I don't know why I'm doing this. This is just silly. Let's just use 2 arrows to know that we have to come back. And that it's a system below it. Sorry about that. That was just silly. Now we have NPCs. Oops. If I could type. We're also going to need a system under that. Then we're going to need players. And a system under that. Alright, so objects shouldn't be too difficult. Basically, we already have an event system in play, so when we receive an object event, we're just going to have a listener divide that up, like basically toss it back as a more specific type of event on an object, and then we'll have more specific listeners listening for that specific event. So we don't really need a system under there because we already have the mechanics to do that. We don't have to add anything new. To be more clear, what I mean is like we'll get a very generic event that comes straight from a packet. Like we have a packet that's transformed into an event. It's just like object command 1 click or something, just very generic. Basically, because we have like ladders or stairs that can be like up, go down, and whatever. So that's what the command thing is. I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna call it, but that's just what I decided to call it for now. Basically, we need to differentiate between those because we can have objects that have like very generic things like go up. We might want to filter it by all of the commands that are go up. We might want to filter it by ID specifically, or some combination. But we can already do this using our event system. We need nothing new for objects. I don't think we need to compose them. Actually, we might, because some objects might have containers in them, like chests. They, depending on how we're going to implement that, they might have a container of objects, or that'd be an interesting way to do it, but I don't think that's practical. But we might also have other things like um, with windmills, when you grind up the wheat and get flour, I believe, that's gonna definitely need like some form of container because it's not always there, and I don't believe the ID changes. I think chests do, but I'm not entirely sure. We'll get to that later. But we might need to compose this, so we might need. Trying to think of a good way to denote that it has traits, because we're gonna be. This layer is gonna actually be written in Scala. This is gonna allow us flexibility and give us access to traits. If an object needs to be composable, we'll have a trait that's composable so that people can compose objects using pure Java. Um, Basically, it's going to be a type safe way to just toss in give a new attribute to an entity. So this is going to need to be composable, and I suppose the way we're going to denote traits that something has is going to be another box attached to it. So now it's just going to need to be composable, and that should cover everything that needs to be done with objects. So NPCs, these are definitely going to need to be composable because we're gonna have like tons and tons of different traits. We'll save a box for later because I don't know how big this is gonna be. So I'm gonna be thinking these up as we go. So we're gonna have composable. And determining if something is a trait or will just be added through the composition trait. Trying to come up with a stand for that. I think the most reasonable way to do it would be if it adds like some core functionality and just very generic. For a lot of NPCs, it would be good. Like composable would definitely be what a trait and not something added through composable. It really can't be. For NPCs, we can have things like if it's able to go into combat, I suppose that would be up for like something that would need to be a trait because it adds like core behavior rather than just like an add-on type of thing. Like if it's in a mini game, that would go into composable, but not a trait. I think this will become more clear once we start implementing things. But till then, we're gonna just hold off on determining what goes in composable and what goes as a trait. This shouldn't really be too big of an issue because I believe the most reasonable way to implement this is going to be using a provider. So it'll have its own basically it's gonna be like its own factory, but simpler. So we can add the logic in there and compose it with different or build it with different traits because we can use them as mix-ins. We can use that as mixing composition, and this other way we can just have it as I don't know what type of composition would be called, but it's just composition of some sort, but it's different. So we're gonna have composable. We're gonna have, I think the term that people in the community have already been using for an NPC that can have combat is compatible. I don't know if we're gonna stick with that because that seems kind of odd. We're gonna have a mobile trait. Mobile, I don't. So we like if it can move. That's pretty core. Just other things. It doesn't matter really. We're just trying to get a base list of traits so we can determine if it's really necessary, I suppose. But we have just those core ones. Now we have player. Let's save off on that again because that was a good approach. We can go. These are definitely composable because we can have tons and tons of things. Some players won't have points for things like pest control and just other things. I mean, not everyone does those specific mini games and events and things, so we can just toss that all into composable rather than adding a trait. That seems much more reasonable. They're going to be, all players are going to be compatible, I suppose. We might, yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. They're going to be mobile. They're also going to be networked. Their input is going to be given through networking, so they're going to need, there's going to be some need for players like to get the channel that they're working on, so we can actually send things, like send packets to and from them, and just identify them that way. So they're going to need a networking trait. I suppose we'll call that networked. Things like inventories and banks, I suppose that would go in it would be a composed trait. Like it'd go in, we'd use the composable trait to add that, because that's not really core functionality. I mean, it's important, but I think it makes more sense to do something like player dot get bank dot class or something rather than just like player. Because if we were to add that, we'd end up having a separate class for bank. So we'd end up doing something extremely similar like player.bank, player.get bank, and then do whatever bank like that class bank has, whatever. So we're gonna toss that in composable, so we don't have all these different methods and have to do all this boilerplate and whatnot to do it. So we'll just have composable and just toss it right in there. So we just have a general idea of some traits and oops. So now we can pull these. We can just toss these all into just a separate package or something that's just all the traits. It doesn't matter what type of entity it is. I mean, so I think this is general enough. I think it's robust enough that we can cover pretty much everything. Really can't think of something because we have, for NPCs and players, and objects themselves, we have two different systems. One that adds core functionalities, and one that adds more trivial, not trivial, but not as important, and things that would be accessed through like get, like methods like get whatever. Those will all go through composable items. I don't see how that would be applicable for like something. I think I consider them more on the side of value objects, but they are still entities. So I think this system, we can always, for objects, we can always add more traits if we absolutely need to, but I don't think we will. I mean, we could for items as well. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. But I think this idea of having a mix of mixing composition and just some other form of composition where you just add things is really nice, because it gives us two very clear ideas. I think it's becoming more clear as we discuss this. So we really have separated this idea of an entity as being like it has traits, and those are core functionalities, and then it's composed. So it's basically, we have these entities that are composed, and that defines its behavior. I think this is a very clean design, much better than having like a player class with like a million different attributes all defined in that class. We can have different parts of the application completely ignore. We don't need to know anything about the other things other than what it's concerned with. So we can have like a separate module for like, I think that what I went with earlier was like pest control. We don't have to worry about a pest control in the player class. That's just the pass control module. Just boom, tosses its own attribute in there using the composable trait, and our player class doesn't become more cluttered over time. The only thing that really changes, would be saving and loading, but that can all be done cleanly with our IO core. We can so that's saving and loading. We can also have attributes that aren't persisted, so we can make these transient if we'd like. Wouldn't be too difficult. We just don't have that functionality. I really don't see any issues. I don't see any. I can't foresee any complications about it being too strict. So I think that it's good. Just trying to think of something quickly that might counter this. I really don't see any corner cases where we can't cover anything. I mean, I'm thinking of crazy things like trying to adapt this. Like the one project I saw was pretty cool. It was basically turning RuneScape into FPS. Even that, I think it'd be robust enough to cover some crazy stuff in there. Anyway, I don't see anything that it can't do. I mean, using a system of mix-in composition and just this composable trait. So I really think we're good. We can pretty this up a little bit. Doesn't need to be that big. Oops. So yeah, I think this is a good system. It should be very robust and should cover everything. So I'm gonna end this video and we'll come back.